Pleasure to be here. My name is Jay Narayanan. I'm at the NUS Business School. Just to kind of give you a little bit of background for why I started doing this research, I had a personal practice of meditation for many years. I first accidentally, as a teenager, because I was asthmatic, started meditating when I was 16 years old. And that was a Vipassana course. Some of you know how difficult it is. And I ran away from my first course. It was like worse than being in prison. That started my journey into a personal practice, into meditation. And going back to the last question from one of the audience members here, I often wonder why I do research on this topic. Because to me, the whole idea of falsifying this is difficult because I've seen from a sample size of 1, it does do wonders. But then as a researcher, you have to put this hat on where you have to falsify this, right? So that's been a constant tension for me. Doing research on this topic, it's always been difficult to be objective, that you have to be as a scientist. Today I'm going to wear a bit of the scientist hat, but I do have my practitioner hat, which is a little bit... if you ask me in my weak moments, I would not put on my scientific hat. But today I'm putting on my scientific hat. So this is research that we've been doing over the last 5 to 6 years. This particular data is actually quite old. It's again latest in the sense of the academic span of time. Latest means anywhere from a decade to 2 decades. So in terms of how quickly data gets published. And as the president earlier remarked about medicine and all of these other disciplines adopting these insights, very often the social sciences we are somewhat behind, and in management and business schools we are far behind. There is a lot of resistance to these kinds of topics in this field. Hopefully that will change. This is hopefully the beginning of that change. So always good to start with William James, any research you do in psychology. So a wonderful quote from a talk to teachers in the 1890s. The possession of such a steady faculty of attention is unquestionably a great boon. Those who have it can work more rapidly and with less nervous wear and tear. I'm inclined to think that no one who is without it naturally can, by any amount of drill or discipline, attain it in a very high degree. He was talking about attention, and William James had no idea that you could look into people's brains. He had no idea that attention could be trained. 100 years, 120 years after this, we know that that's not true. Attention can be trained. There are reliable markers of attention. The labs at UC Davis, the Shamatha Project, the labs at Wisconsin-Madison, very clearly demonstrates in studies with monks, in studies with lay people who practice over long periods of time, there are remarkable changes in people's levels of attention with training. And there are signature neural signals that tell you that people's attentions have changed. It's not a self-report, as one of them was saying. It's, self-report measures are notoriously prone to errors. So these are neural signals, and they show that there are signatures of greater attention. So William James was wrong, but he was right that people who possess it can do better in their lives. So the question now is, how does this translate into the workplace, right? Are there actual benefits to having better attention skills? Now, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I had prepared these slides before I knew what the others were saying. So I have to go with some momentum. So I'm going to go along with my slides. So this is an experiment that was done by Dan Simmons at Harvard. And this is the same people who had the invisible gorilla, if some of you know this, the gorilla that goes across the room and you don't see it. This is another experiment, and we're going to just quickly see what our minds really are made of and how inattentive our minds can be.
And yet an experiment by psychologists Dan Simmons and Chris Chabris at Harvard reveals that our brains actually process very little of what comes in through the eyes.
In this experiment, a subject comes up to a counter, and a first experimenter hands them a consent form. As soon as they finish signing the consent form, they hand it back to the first experimenter, who then takes the consent form, ducks down behind the counter to put it away, and a different experimenter then stands up and hands the subject a packet of information and sends them into a hallway where we ask them questions about it.
This wonderful experiment uncovers an aspect of the brain's attention system known as change blindness.
Change blindness is the idea that we often miss large changes to our visual world from one view to the next. We're often not able to see large changes that would appear to be perfectly obvious to somebody who knows they're going to happen.
And incredibly, in 75% of cases, the subjects don't notice a thing.
The lady who took me up here, she opened the door for me and told me to walk over to the desk. This form. All right. I think there was a sign that said experiment. And a man there gave me a form to sign.
There was the guy standing under a big sign that said experiment. And to my left, there was like a pot with some dirt in it and some plastic containers. Is it the fifth?
Yeah, this one. Oh, I filled out a form.
Okay.
Right.
This form. How long would it be about before it's...
And I asked him how long it would take. He said about 10, 15 minutes or so.
I guess I have the time to do that.
Did you notice anything unusual at all after you signed the consent form?
I just signed it, and I didn't even pay attention to anything that was written on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
After you handed it back to him, did you notice anything unusual happen at all?
If you could just take this into the next one.
No, I probably wasn't even looking that direction. I probably turned and looked towards the clear door. I saw some people there.
Okay.
Then I turned back and looked at him for a second.
Okay. Did you notice anything unusual at all after you signed the consent form?
No.
This is only gonna take 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, it'll be real short.
Okay.
The person who stood up was actually a different person.
Okay.
I gather you didn't notice that was different? No. A different person actually stood up and handed you this form and sent you out toward me. I gather from your reaction you didn't notice that?
No.
Okay. Don't feel bad about that. Actually, most of the time, we find about 75% of people don't notice.
Are you serious?
Yeah. The person who stood...
So yes, so our minds wander, and I've done this in a class where I was playing this video, and as the video was playing, I went back stage and I changed my T-shirt, and my class didn't notice that I changed my T-shirt. So our minds are wandering, right? And this is the study that Rasmus actually alluded to earlier, a large-scale study with millions of data points done by Matt Killingsworth at Harvard. A wonderful app and a very, very simple study. It's called trackyourhappiness.org. It still works. It's an iPhone app as well. So it's a very simple study which asks people, what are you doing right now? Is your mind wandering? And how happy are you right now? So some of you might think mind wandering is a good thing. In fact, there's some suggestion that in order for you to be creative, your mind should wander, right? If your minds don't wander, then where is all of that creativity going to come from? Could be a counter-argument, right? But what they found here is quite startling, which is a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So your mind could be all over the place, but it's not good for you. You're not subjectively experiencing a sense of well-being when your mind is wandering. So attention is a good thing, and now the question is attention a good thing for organizations? Is it good for us to train people to be more attentive at the workplace? Again, I'm preaching to the choir, but we know this. So what is the relationship between mindfulness and mind wandering? So a recent paper by Jonathan Schooler, who's one of the people who started studying mind wandering, finds that a short mindfulness induction, even an 8-minute mindfulness induction, can actually make your minds wander less. So the fact that the reason Rasmus went first was by design. We wanted your minds to not wander for the rest of our conversations so that you could be here now. So it's just a 1-minute manipulation and you all are here. Okay, so that's the reason why we had the mindfulness task first. Again, we've heard about multitasking. We've heard about overloaded circuits. Again, is it a good thing for people to be multitasking? The answer is a clear no. There is some evidence, for example, Sophie Leroy, who's at Minnesota, finds that when people switch between tasks, it leaves what's called a task residue. People are still thinking about the task that they did before, and that actually interferes with their effective functioning in the task that follows. So as much as people think, it's one of those things like sleep. Another thing that people are very proud about is the fact that they don't sleep for 8 hours. It's like, oh, I can get by 4 hours of sleep. But whatever we know from cognitive neuroscience research, that's not true. People's naive beliefs that they can function with just 4 hours of sleep is wrong. In a similar way, people's naive beliefs that they can actually work, multitask, and get things done effectively is actually wrong as well. Okay? So can mindfulness actually, this is actually from Google, it's actually not a cartoon, it's a photograph, can mindfulness positively affect performance? That's the primary research question that we started with. This is, by the way, how Lauren speaks to his subordinates. The model that we tested here is this. So let me explain what the idea here is. This research has, by the way, evolved. So the whole idea of emotional intelligence into this model is new. So the design is very similar to the study that Jochen presented earlier, the second study. So this is, again, not an intervention. It's a measure of mindfulness. So we went to people. All of this data comes from India. It's about 286 dyads in India of managers and subordinates. Okay? So the managers fill in reports on employee performance, and the subordinates do self-report measures of their mindfulness, of how emotionally exhausted are they at work, and their levels of emotional intelligence. So these are all self-report measures. And performance is a supervisor-reported measure. So that's the design here. And all of this is self-report. Unfortunately, we don't have interventions here. It would have been nice to have an intervention design, but it's not easy to get an intervention design. So if any of you in organizations want to help us get interventions data, please be our guests. This is the model we are trying to test. The idea is mindfulness will lead to better job performance. And the reason why this will happen is because it will lower emotional exhaustion. So mindfulness basically endows people with an ability to regulate themselves. And this regulating themselves will mean that they will perform better, and they will also be lower on emotional exhaustion. That's the general idea here. And what's the little box there of emotional intelligence doing here? The idea is that people who are already high on emotional intelligence will not benefit as much from mindfulness because they're already regulating themselves. Those who are low on emotional intelligence, these are the ones who are going to get the bang for the buck with mindfulness. So that's the underlying idea, and that's precisely what we found. Besides finding that mindfulness actually predicts performance, I'm not showing you the numbers here, but trust me on this, we would not get by peer review without showing the results as they should be shown. But mindfulness does lead to better performance. And the effect is indeed mediated, or in the statistical language, mediated, or it occurs because it lowers emotional exhaustion. We find that as well. And we also find this curious pattern here, which is that for those who are high on emotional intelligence, mindfulness does not matter as much for job performance. Although the red line looks like it's inclining downwards, it's a very small slope. So it's not as though for people who are high on emotional intelligence, their performance goes down with mindfulness. That does not happen, thankfully. What happens, though, is for those who are low on emotional intelligence, being mindful actually really increases their performance at work. So what we are finding is, like in statistical sense, we call it an interaction, but there is an interaction between mindfulness and emotional intelligence that predicts performance. So and this is the nature of the statistical interaction. Okay? So here, we know that mindfulness matters at the workplace. We've had a number of talks here that have alluded to the fact that mindfulness is helpful at the workplace. Now the question is, if mindfulness is such a great thing, why is there such a reluctance, or why is there such a slow kind of adoption? That's the question. The reason I asked the question of Lauren as well. Why aren't more organizations doing this? If you think of the world as a marketplace, if there is an opportunity that with mindfulness, people are going to perform better, the stock market should figure this out, right? Why aren't people figuring this out? Why isn't this happening? Actually, I think it's happening as we speak, thanks to Google Trends. If you look at the trend of mindfulness as a search term from 2005, there's been a steady increase in the number of times people have searched for the term mindfulness. And if you look at mindfulness at work, which is, I did this kind of crazily last night, almost nothing till 2011. 2012, people were just sleeping. Nobody was wondering about mindfulness at work. Suddenly, Lauren introduced mindfulness at work at Google, and there you go, that big spike, and then it's going above, and now Rasmus has joined him as well, and that's the spike, the second and the third spike there. So hopefully the time has come, for mindfulness to convert mindfulness into dollars, so the marketplace will reward organizations that adopt mindfulness, and that's the beginning right here. Thank you.